Danse, Oki, bonjour. Hello, listeners. My name is Andrea Menard, and I am the lead educational developer of Indigenizing Curricula and Pedagogies at the Center for Teaching and Learning, and cross-appointed with the Office of the Vice Provost for Indigenous Programming and Research. I am Métis from the abolished Red River settlement that straddles the Treaty 1 and North Dakota area in the United States. Welcome to WOW! On today's episode, we will be hearing from Elder John Bigstone. In Indigenous communities, the word elder does not necessarily mean senior citizen. An elder can be a person of any age, chosen by community for their wisdom and kindness. They are the ones who have the PhDs. And it is from life lessons that someone becomes an elder. And they have different skill sets and areas of expertise. I would like to create space within our pedagogies to honor the oral histories, stories, and perspectives of elders, for they are the knowledge holders in our communities. I would like to promote awareness and introduce you to local Indigenous peoples' perspectives, worldviews, oral histories, and to celebrate the knowledge that was rooted on this land before Canada became a country. Elder John Bigstone is a Cree elder from Bigstone Cree Nation, which is 4 hours north of Edmonton and next to the town of Wabasca. This whole area sits between Treaties 6 and 8. John's spirit name is Golden Eagle, osow kihew in Cree. His Cree ancestry has many generations of leaders and ceremonial holders. Following the legacy of his proud heritage, John is also a traditional knowledge keeper and ceremonial holder.
My grandfather was the first chief of the Bigstone Cree Nation, and he was going to pass on the leadership to my father, but my father didn't want it, so he pulled us out of the residential school when I was 12 years old, yeah. And I was in residential school for 7 years, so I experienced a lot while I was in there. Maybe I'll talk on that a little later. Anyway, I come from a long line of spiritual leaders in general, and ceremonial holders, pipe holders, that kind of thing. And I'm actually I'm the only one in my family that actually follows that.
John is a residential school survivor. At the age of 6, he entered the St. Martin Residential School, where he was forced to attend for the next 7 years. While in this institution, he was mentally, physically, sexually, and emotionally abused. These traumatic experiences led him toward self-destructive behavior for many years. I asked John if he felt comfortable sharing anything from this time in his life. It was difficult for him to talk about, especially over a Zoom call. I would never want him to relive these traumas, but I feel that it's vital to hear first-hand accounts so that Canadians never forget what happened to the children who are taken by the residential school system. The following clips are from several conversations with John over the course of 4 months, starting in June 2022. Please note, some of the audio quality might vary.
At the age of 6, I went into the residential school where I stayed for 7 years. And I experienced a lot of trauma. And it's been a lifetime struggle, dealing with that trauma. And it's so easy to slide back into that, just when you think you've dealt with the trauma and associated life issues, and kind of just all of a sudden comes out of nowhere. And I have to be vigilant all the time to identify it and actually address it. So when I was 6 years old, I ended up in a residential school. It was a very traumatic event, simply because you end up in this building, right? You don't know why you're there. How come you have to be there? That's my first trauma, the feeling of abandonment by my parents. Lacking the understanding, it was mandated, it was a policy of Indian affairs that we would be placed in a residential school when we turned 6 years old. And thus began my indoctrination into the ways of the church. So, and all the church teaching, the conditioning, the programming. And that was my first trauma. Being just dropped off in a residential school with 200 different strange kids I didn't know, wondering why am I here? I'm not understanding that my parents had to take me to residential school, or they could end up in jail if they refused. So that's the part, that people don't understand. How could a parent go drop off their kid in the residential school, not understanding that the government and the church had a firm grip on how to control the Indians, so I ended up there. Of course, there was a second trauma, fear. Why am I here? Why am I with all these kids? And then having your hair all shaved off, and they put coal oil on our heads in case we had lice, and they gave us a brush to try in an effort to scrape off the brown off our skin. It didn't work. We had to scrape our skin till we bled. Of course, that didn't work, so these were the things, the fear, the anxiety, asking, why am I here? Why are these nuns doing this to us, It was an experience, a traumatic experience right off the bat. And then there was a disconnection from the family. Familiarity. I didn't see my parents for 7 years, even though I could see our house across the lake. I couldn't go home. That's another trauma. I started to disconnect from my feelings, because it's a survival adaptation. That's how I coped from the loneliness. Being taken away from my parents, placed in this institution where I was going to be punished in mind, body, spirit. It was a very traumatic time in my life. So the disconnection, the separation from my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, uncles, anything that was familiar was removed from my life. And as to survive, I had to disconnect myself from my feelings. It was too painful to bear. Crying yourself to sleep at night, and the nun coming slapping you because, you weren't allowed to feel. So, crying was not allowed. Any emotion was not allowed. So you cried very quietly, but the pain remained. I had to shut down those feelings. And that had a detrimental effect as an adult later on, because you can't just shut off your feelings and turn them on. And it affected me for many years. And it's took me years of healing to start feeling again, to feel human. And one of the things they did to us while I was in there was, kids that are traumatized will pee their bed. If they're lonely, they're anxious, they're full of fear. A lot of us peed our bed because of the trauma. It's a trauma response. So what they did was, we peed our bed. We had to strip off the sheet. And they used to place us in the middle of the hallway between the beds, that space, and they threw that sheet over our head to humiliate us, And believe me, there was a line of us there all the time. Even that, that was part of their control of us, to keep us in fear. So, and humiliation was one of them. It was a place where we had to survive. That's why they call it survivors of the residential school. We had to survive. We had to find a way. We had to adapt. We had to cope. So that shutting down your emotions today, parents don't know how to parent, not only because I was taken away from us, but they can't associate with their feelings and emotions for their children, because it hurts too much. So I experienced that. When I became a parent, I didn't know how to parent. I had no idea. Nobody ever showed me compassion. Nobody ever showed me love in a residential school, just punishment. So there's generations today on the reserve that continue that trauma response, and people wonder why. The mainstream wonders, why are these Indians so messed up? Well, I'm telling you now why. My response to trauma, to the sexual, emotional, mental, and physical abuse, was to self-destruct. For the longest time in my life, I self-destructed.
Despite the ongoing struggle of coping with trauma, John made the decision later in life to pursue a Bachelor of Social Work at the University of Regina. He then returned home and was instrumental in the development and management of the mental health program for the Bigstone Cree Nation. And he still works as an elder, counselor, and healing and wellness facilitator in the community.
I'm a helper. I was a born helper, but I didn't realize that till I was in my 40s, ironically. But the reason why I went into social work was because I wanted to help. I know the effects of trauma among Indigenous people, so I set out to get educated and help out however I can. And I was a mental health therapist for many years for the Bigstone Cree Nation. I actually developed a program myself. It's still in operation. And I do a variety of workshops, empowerment workshops, information workshops. I'm asked to facilitate conferences, where I share my story, and I also have a lot of knowledge on many topics, so, which is useful for when I'm with restorative justice, because a lot of these clients come from diverse backgrounds, experiences, but the common denominator is always trauma. I'm in a field of helping. I'm a helper. In Cree, I'm a naskapil, a young helper. Well, I'm not so young anymore, but I'm a helper, So that's what I do. And I don't place myself above anybody. I'm not better than anybody. I'm a servant. I'm a servant of the people. I serve the Creator. I serve Mother Earth and all of life. This is what I have chosen to do with my life. You know, I'm a ceremonial holder. I'm a pipe holder. And that's what I do.
As I was listening to John speak about his social and mental health work, I got the feeling that his spiritual work was closely tied to it. I got the sense that, during his own healing process, ceremony began to call to him.
Like I'm a ceremonial holder, like I said. I'm a pipe holder, and I've been practicing for many years. I know when I say practice, it's a continual learning process. Every time I do a lodge, I learn something different. When the grandfather spirits gave me that lodge, they said, we're not going to give you any directions. You find out on your own. You'll learn. So basically, I took it on with a clean slate, and I'm learning every time, So the people that join a lodge, I know they have a lot of trauma, and I know I share a lot of information before and after the lodge because I feel that that's my responsibility.
If you've never heard of a sweat lodge before, I can explain a few things from my experience. It's a sacred space, but don't think of it as a church or temple. It's a way to connect to the earth and cleanse your spirit. And it can only take place in specific locations, at specific times, and you need an elder to guide you through the process.
A lot of people crawl into a lodge without knowing what it's about. Why am I there? What brought me here? Those kind of things. I try to enlighten them so they'll have an idea as to what the sweat lodge is about. The sweat lodge will come to a person in either two different ways. It can be handed down from an existing ceremonial holder, like a sweat lodge holder, same with the pipe. Or it could come from the spirit realm, the spirits. We call them grandfathers, grandmothers. The better term would be atayuchan, the Creator's messengers. That's what atayuchan means. And for me, that's how it came to the atayuchanak. They said, you're ready to lead a lodge, because it's a sweat lodge is not owned like by me. It's a gift to the people from the Creator and to the messengers. So I can never lay claim to the sweat lodge. I lead the sweat lodge because I was gifted to lead the lodge. The other reason it's used is for healing. People come to heal, whether it's physical, mental, or spiritual. They come there, they bring tobacco, they bring broadcloth, and maybe a gift to the ceremonial holder. And then the ceremonial holder will speak on their behalf and ask the Yochanak, the grandfathers and grandmothers, for assistance to help this person. Because I, myself, am not the one that's going to heal them. I'm kind of like the medium. I speak on their behalf through the pipe. If somebody comes, they make a request. Maybe they have a physical ailment, or they could be totally lost, disconnected from spirit. And these things, and I speak on their behalf.
As we come to the end of this episode, I wanted to share a clip of John explaining what prayer is you might wonder what prayer has to do with teaching and learning. And there are 2 points I think you should consider. First, elders are often asked to open and close educational events. When CTL hosted our 2022 Online Teaching Institute, a major cross-campus conference at the U of A, we asked John to open the event. As is customary, when elders participate in events, John offered a prayer. So if you work with an elder or invite them to speak to an audience, it's important to understand what prayer is from their perspective, because it's not the same as a Christian prayer, for example. Secondly, elders themselves are also educators, and prayer is part of their pedagogy. There's a wisdom in learning from their model of teaching others.
Prayer is about the sharing of that energy, right? The energy of the prayer is what's important here. It doesn't matter if you understand the Cree language, because I always say my prayers in Cree, because that's the language of my ancestors, and that's how they pray. When you start including English, it takes away, the prayer, because we've been told by the ancestors and the spirits, we call them Atayochanek, the Creator's messengers, that pray in your own language, because that's what was given to you. That's how you prayed since time immemorial, and so that's how we conduct the prayer. And it's more like the thought and the energy and the incorporation of the spiritual realm that has that impact of that prayer being rendered. So it's all inclusive. When I pray, it's all not only for the event, but all of the Mother Earth and everything. I include everything, right? So, and that's how you benefit from that. The energies are there, and the ancestors and the spiritual realm comes to listen, and they, if you're connected, they will bless the event. That's why that's how that happens. Like, it's all about energy. It's about good praying from the heart, for the good of humanity and for the good of the event, so that things that will work out because they have a huge impact. The spiritual realm will make sure that the event is blessed. And you have to ask the right way, So all of you present have your own spirit guides. I have to ask permission, to speak to the ones that guide you. It is not only me that has spirit guides, that has my backup, my posse, right? You also have yours. So I have to have permission to speak to your guides. Everybody has them. You have your own spirit guide, your primary spirit guide, and I have to ask permission. I can't just go barging in there and telling them what to do, so I ask. That's the proper way. So everybody gets a blessing because they'll be working with me. It's not just me. I ask the spirits that guide you to work, all of us to work together. It's all inclusive, So, yeah, just wanted to share that a little bit, what prayer is, actually. Back before the 50s, I believe there was a prohibition from practicing spiritual ceremonies. Anything having to do with ceremonies was banned by the government, by the Indian Affairs. So we weren't, my father and, my uncles and all of these elders really could not practice our ways, you know. So that was prohibited, and you could end up in jail if you were caught doing a ceremony that didn't fit the doctrines and dogma of the church. So it was punishable by ending up in jail. So they had to hide. They continued, but they had to go sometimes miles into the bush to conduct their ceremonies.
Thank you to Elder John Bigstone for sharing his time and knowledge with us. To end, I'd like to share one of John's prayers with you. If you don't understand Cree, I challenge you to move past the discomfort of not knowing the language. Allow yourself to feel the intention behind John's words. A prayer can shift us from our heads to our hearts. It's an invitation to look inward and shift our mindset. It's not about deciphering the exact nature of John's prayer and extracting that knowledge from him. The prayer is an invitation to be present and center ourselves. It's a reminder that teaching and learning as a field is not intrinsically good. It can also cause harm, as we know from John's first-hand residential school account. The prayer is more than a feel-good moment. It's a reminder that the work we do within educational institutions is rooted in violence. Having an elder open with a prayer in their language is a dismantling of what we're used to in the formal academic arena. Considering it was illegal for him to practice his own traditions, and residential school explicitly tried to erase his culture and break his spirit. It's a miracle that John is here and willing to share his sacred practice with all of us. And it's a privilege to be included in his prayer.
Samina, mutta tohtskawapen mamohtawimaw si manito kia kawaskaunaman matsoon itakitahtaakap muhtiit. Osow kihew kamaskawgapawn sihason nohtawi iksamagistihasiin piagnia kituskapim muinia pogo. Moi vatnia liganahison minputagaisiin omoin piaguimso. Omakahagisa mojan kapistawiin kakstawiiguttigisa kohkatigajain negagisa moon. Kapiagittamagistawiin omagaisiin juujaan. Muingakihettaan kiikoisohahatiks kiistamaan. Kitskiikoigapappiuna muin omakapahuina muinstottamuun koteisko. Giisagagisa mun. No, tuo muuttakaa pian, nohtawi. Msawaatas se kahkijoukita tuossa haaganak. Kahkijou, atajuhkan. Okisago, kistogisago. Niueedassago taptoogik. Läpidäks mskawasam gujahvau. Kita tuossa haaganak. Nottago atajuhkan. Okima uskaapju, okima opiiso. Nuastoti nohom, gumawapska mustas kohtavat. Kahki outa, nui homavat. Kapi vitap mto. Kapi sawista huomio. Kapi nata wista huomio. Kagi samuan. Tawisko kapi mamsiro taut. Kapi eksvista muovo. Kami jo paigomio. mutta tuskiunua. Kasitoska to. Kotakuhna komiasni. Maatsekäänä, mutta kapiuna muivat, kapahkuina muivat, stohta muuna, kapatihtai ei inua. Maatsekä mieno kannattaa kuitenkin imujään. Kisa toskiittaa kahki jo. Yksi kiimaa, kahki jokin tuolla semmoista nienä. On rastja. Täks nohmaa gustoa. Että vaan semmoista minä. Ja kun ne kahki jo tuolla semmoista. Tuossa mua, kun sä päin nuolla. Kahki jo kohtaan kiituumakaan kaikki samoja. No piks kuista mua. Moin kiittää niin ei vaan kiikoiksi kiistämään. Ei vaan kiiko ei sohka kaikki samoja. Mä stiimau känikään nohti. Mä patnäs on. Guamma saat kaunikään nohtaa kun jään puuma kaikki samoja. Mistä hän nohti, kenä skumpin. Matsoen. Iguan mamgan tämä tähän matsoen. Miup matsoen. Aiko jäskuak. Kaiken näyttää nyt mohti unnan. Etän mä. Jos pihtäis kamkaa kuuma. Äki miiaa, että omakat muhtiaa. Kuomassa tässä viistä lähti. Maatsekäännä. Kiikoi, isnehtä kunikään miaset. Kiika tistain nohtaui. Kaki tuotiin, että niin on. Kojaskan mä kui se vaskavittaa. Vistoa ei se patnettaa. Kiikoi käpietus kätähkoo. Kojaskse. Ai siinä on kaikki niillä kätoskaa. Kämska vasome. Kiikoi käpätihtäät. Kuhtset määtsä. Määtsäkäänä kottakaa piuna muu, kottakaa ei siinä ole tohta muuna. Kisääpä tihtäi tuoma. Voitaisiin joutta tämmöisessä puitakaan tänne mihtää. Ikan manna käpätä. Tänni sohamaatuja. Kavutsekä poistatuja. Muokaa kauhaat ojat. Kapskihti imaa ja voitaisiin jokin tuolla semmoiset nienään. Että tuossa hagen, että missä olet määnä pintohtamak. Pintohtamak kikoa ja kaikki semmoituttamaan. Maatsekään kun tauhtse, uijavaa puutnamakko jo. Ja tien mä hahtaakaan mohtit, kotiikaksi tauju muuma. Kaikki semmoon. Känis ohamaa kun taukikaksi nohamaa kustaa. Mienoksekin saapa tehtää tuo, oma kaikki miettoo. Mio mamton ihtsekän, mio tihiuen. Tahtaa kumia oa, kakanaata niivaa. Määtsekään, kaks kiihtämä kiikoaikaksi noho muotoa. Voit saa nuova, kahki joo, mohtii tämmöisä skiituuta, osketaskam. Känis ohamaa kui. Egon mä en ole kuitenkaan, mä mohtaa oimauksi mannettu. Tahtaa osaapi, että toska haikanak. Kämi johtaa tuo. Kaksi vuotta kasaakin kujahkoa, kapisi tuskaa kujahkoa. Moi kahki jo, ei huihaavak. Mikä kahki jo yksi kiimakoa. Mä kahki jo, että tuska haikanak. Mia noksi. Kavaska unahkoa vahtaa. Niistä ottakaa pian. Moi ei vaan niin tiimson minun takai siinä. Että kämmäm siirrytään kaujaan. Että kiikoikaa miaa sekä pahvina muin. Hyvän poko tapa tehtään. Käsi toskauak toutiin. Kämska vaasumak, että mio päivi. Että iskohisen stohtamaan oma matsoon taui. Maatsekään, tämän saivaakakin hittyjään. Kasa viimättä uisko, kakena viimät. Uyaasaiksiistamaan isaagik tuipiakatsoasan. Tahtoassan higawi tapmat. Aksna homuat. Kojas omamtaniistagan. Kojas kutihi otahtaa hommio kastig. Maatsagana muigapatngiu. Muigamsoanaatsamio ois. Papiahtik kakki ituinnohtaui. Papiahtik sepikshuaseisiino. Kasaarihat ituutin. Oigutta kagisepat naman guangsiwat suwan. Ikokanisa kihiä. Kakkianna tintohtaunaan kiiguajanna kantottamaajaa. Tapa tiimono muutakaman silotaagoihan nohtaui. Tapa tiimonas sota pintohta koogahjuukita toskahaagana kasaakihiguyaa wow. Kaksiwat otaagoyaa. Matsuunan kantottamaajaan. Miojawan. Sauim guussuwen. Tapa tiimon. Tän saivaakakin hettyjään. Nana skomten mä mauhtaui maukihtsahtaa. Kihtsamahtaa. Eksäännät, että missä vaatana. Kakstaa uomkaakin samoodissa kohkettiikään. Kahjoukita tuska hakenak pintohtamak. Missä vaat ujoakaa mohtaa toukuju. Mia nohkaavi tohtiimakahkuumankaakin samood. Kenänä skomten mstähe. Kahjoassa käpi tohtii. Kenänä skomtnää ookäpi siituskaui. Hau, eksäännät, että nana skomon ketä mehen naavaa. Hai.
This podcast was produced in Amiskwaciy, Waskagan, otherwise known as Edmonton, on Treaty 6 territory, home of the Cree, Dene, Nakota Sioux, Blackfoot, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Inuit, the Métis, and many others.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Teaching Plus. This podcast has been created by the University of Alberta's Centre for Teaching and Learning. You can get more information on any of our services by going to ctl.ualberta.ca.